Time for history! As a bit of interesting historical background, MSR, or Mountain Safety Research, started out as a newsletter back in 1969 by then-founder Mr. Larry Penberthy. Mr. Penberthy was a mountaineer, inventor, engineer, and sometimes controversial figure. His primary goal with his then fledgling organization was to improve mountaineering safety, often inventing and developing equipment himself to do so. After a few short months with the MSR newsletter, however, Mr. Penberthy realized that its visionary ambitions would soon exceed his available funding, and so Mountain Safety Research Incorporated was born. As Mr. Penberthy had stated, the company was formed as a vehicle to make and sell safety equipment as a means of supporting the equipment development and safety education program. An example of his innovative activities can be seen at the bottom of Mr. Penberthy's November 1969 MSR newsletter. On the last page of the newsletter, you can see for sale a metal shafted ice axe for $28.50 USD. Quite a steal. This ice axe was manufactured at a time when European-style wooden shafted ice axes were still the standard norm. MSR pioneered this and many other outdoor innovations, such as heat exchanger pots and remote fuel stove systems, headlamps that featured lithium batteries, and armpit zips for ventilating waterproof jackets. Pretty cool stuff. Larry Penberthy passed away back in 2001 at the mature age of 85 years old. Though he may be gone, his legacy lives on, in the form of MSR, which is now owned by Cascade Designs, and more importantly, in his 3 surviving daughters. This video is chapter 1 of a very special interview series I've assembled with the help of Larry's daughters, Doris, Laura, and Louisa, on the life and times of Mr. Larry Penberthy. Enjoy. Hello, ladies. Thank you again for taking the time to speak with me. It really means a lot, and I appreciate it immensely. I'm not sure, Doris and Louise, if you're familiar with how this kind of all started, but I saw an interview on a YouTube video with, I think, at Washington University. Was that correct, Laura?
I think it's Utah State University.
That's it, yeah.
Utah, right? Sorry, but I saw the video, and it was a interview with Bruce Johnson, and I saw in the comments that your response, and I ended up contacting you, and so this is kind of how things all initiated. But it's just funny what technology can enable. But could you please, each of you, just do a little introduction of yourself, like who you are, a little bit about your life, and your family relation, obviously. So you are the daughters of Mr. Larry Penberthy. Would you like to start, Doris?
Okay. I am Doris Penberthy Lochner, and I'm the oldest one by about 18 and 20 years from Louise and Laura, because I'm from his first family. I'm the oldest child, period, and they're from the second family. But we stayed in contact a lot, and so it's like we're all one family. I live in California, and I've lived here since 1968. So that's I've been away, what I really mean to say is I've been away from the Seattle for that long, but I've always gone back to visit, and I have a lot of memories of the early part of our father's life up to about just before Louise and Laura were born.
Would you like to go next, Laura?
Let's let Louise go next. We'll go in order of age.
In order of age. So my name is Louise Penberthy, and I am Larry Penberthy's second daughter and third child. I grew up in Seattle, so I'm part of his second family. I lived various other parts in the United States and spent a short stint in London in college, but I'm back in Seattle. I've been here for 21 years because I really love Seattle.
I'm Laura Grove, and I'm the youngest of Larry Penberthy's 4 children. And I was born in 1963, so I was only 6 when MSR was founded. So it was kind of part of my growing up years, but that doesn't mean I understood very clearly what was going on or why or what he was trying to accomplish. But I am thrilled that people remember him and are interested in his life and his inventions. So Josh, it was delightful to hear from you last spring, and I'm so glad that we've been able to all get together and talk.
Me too, absolutely, yeah.
I should probably say that we're talking about four children, and there was a son who was a year younger than me, but he died when he was a teenager. So um, that's where the four children come from.
Thank you for bringing that up, Doris. Would you be comfortable mentioning his name?
Oh, his name was Donald.
Yeah.
Donald Penberthy.
Thank you. I think for my kind of opening question, working perhaps backwards in time, what do you feel Mr. Penberthy's or Larry's, what he would have felt his greatest achievement was in his lifetime, and what gave him the most satisfaction and happiness within that period?
I think there were several things he was proud of. One was all the work he did in increasing safety in mountaineering gear, and then all the innovations he did in the work in glass and glass melting, and also in the area of classifying low-level nuclear waste and hazardous waste, which was, as I recall, derided in his lifetime, but is now being used in Hanford, Washington, which was a place where they, as I understand, refined uranium during World War II, and is now a hideously toxic nuclear site. But his techniques are now being used.
Thank you, Louise. What do you think, Doris?
But my thought was sort of along what Louise said, except that I think that he was not the start of, but within the start of the whole issue of safety and of anything, whether it was mountaineering or the food we eat or cars we drive, that there's a lot more awareness now. And he was in that, what if you want to call it a movement, that still exists now. I mean, if he were able to look back and see what he was doing then and what's happening now, that he might be pretty agree with all of that kind of stuff.
How about you, Laura?
I'd like to add one more project of his. And that's because he saw so many people climbing Mount Rainier develop mountain sickness. So acute mountain sickness, type R. And so pulmonary edema and other, dizziness, disorientation, other things like that. And acute mountain sickness can be fatal and has been on many occasions in various places around the world where climbers go to high altitude. From what I understand, he felt it was a particular issue at Mount Rainier because Mount Rainier is so close to highly populated areas, the whole Seattle-Tacoma area, that where people either live at sea level or can travel to very easily from anywhere else in the world. Then it's possible for them to climb Mount Rainier because it's right there, and they can get from sea level to the top of the mountain in 24 hours. And 14,000 feet, that's a lot of elevation change. And so he felt that was one of the factors, because in comparison, when people travel to the Himalayas, often they go and they spend a period of weeks getting acclimated to the elevation before they attempt to summit a peak in the Himalayas. But people tend not to do that as much with Mount Rainier. So he had pursued that, trying to find a solution. He had a solution he thought would work. Other people thought it wouldn't. There was quite a bit of discussion about that, and there's some documentation of that, I think some of which we provided for you and some of which we could still try to find. But that is a project that he worked on for many years, and that's actually the one that he was working on at the moment that he passed away. That was important to him, and he wanted to continue to pursue it. And he did make a contribution to accumulated knowledge about acute mountain sickness.
Wow, that's quite remarkable. I do specifically remember reading through the detail of his efforts in preventative and treatment of acute mountain sickness. Ironically, like I've actually experienced it. I've had pulmonary edema. I've been helicoptered out of the Himalaya before, so I definitely understand some of the consequences. That's fantastic. Wow. From where he effectively left his work to the present day, has anyone kind of picked up the torch, so to speak, or what's the status of that now? Or do you have any awareness of that, Laura?
I don't have any awareness of that. I'd have to do a little research to see if anybody has picked that up and moved that forward.
Perhaps then, kind of moving on to next question. I'm aware that Larry, was very much an entrepreneur, and he very involved in mountain safety, but his other businesses as well. For a person like that, so motivated and ambitious, what do you feel Larry would say that perhaps the most three important characteristics are in life to be successful? What do you think his answer would be, or even perhaps your own views on that topic? Would you like to start again first, Doris? Sorry.
No.
Or Louise or Laura?
I have some things written down, and if I can find them, it will be easier. What is that a particular question? Is that
it's one of the questions.
But we don't know which one.
I don't. Well, I think he would say, what's important in success is if you have a good idea, pursue it.
Yeah.
If you see a problem, try to solve it, and don't let the naysayers get in your way. Mm-hmm. Laura, what do you think? Does that sound, or Doris?
Yes, actually, that's it. Particularly, don't let the naysayers get in your way. Basically, ignore the naysayers or brush them aside, which was probably most of the time was his attitude towards naysayers. And as far as success, I'm not sure that he ever felt satisfied enough with what he had accomplished. He always wanted to accomplish something more. So I don't think that there was ever a moment in his life where he said to himself, I'm a success, I can stop now. He was always pursuing the next thing. It was always the next idea. And the only reason that he stopped was because he suddenly passed away. He had no intention of retiring. He was always going to be pursuing the next project, the next idea, the next invention. So he switched from one project to another through his life, but it was maybe because he had accomplished something or he was more interested in the next thing. But I don't know that he ever was completely satisfied with what he had already achieved. He was always pursuing the next idea.
Josh, you asked a question that had something to do with if you could do something magical, something superpower. It was something about superpower. I think that, tagging on what Laura is saying, I think that he would have wanted to be able to expand time or to expand his life or whatever, because he had so many ideas and he was still working on them. They were still coming. The other thing that crosses my mind, it crosses it quite a bit, is Louise said, he sees a problem and he tries to solve it. Now that might work in the business world, didn't work quite as well in some of his personal relationships. And I can, you want a story? I've got a story.
Absolutely.
He would see something that he thought it needed to be done, and so he would go ahead and do it, regardless of what the person said. So his sister's name was Mary. So our Aunt Mary had a cabin in the woods outside of Tacoma. And we would go out there and visit in the woods and, have picnics and stuff. She had a little cabin and lots of second growth trees around there. And he had this chainsaw, little power chainsaw that he loved. I don't know if you girls remember, but anyway, he loved it. So he would take it with him and he would go outside Aunt Mary's cabin and say, you've got all this stuff that's sticking out here and I will do it for you. It needs to be done. And she said, no, it doesn't. She was one of the few people that could easily talk back to him and say, no, that's not what I want, and it's my property. So he finally had to stop doing that chainsaw that day. It was. I thought it was sort of funny. Um, but okay, and here's the difference between families, because I have one family, you and Louise and Laura have another family, and my mother was I saw it all my life, but anyway, it wasn't too bad. But my mother did not know how to. That's not quite right, but it was something she didn't know how to deal with. But your mother, I heard things every once in a while. She'd say quietly to him, Larry, that's not quite right. You need to rephrase that. Like instead of saying, I know something better, we're going to do it that way, I do know something different. Would you like to try it? That kind. But I heard her saying that kind of thing. So it's a difference, and I think he mellowed on that over time. Maybe you have a different idea, but I felt he did.
Do you have any
Yeah.
commentary on that, Luis or Laura?
Yeah, I silenced them.
I'm not sure that I noticed that one way or another. I did see her a couple of times stop him or sort of indicate that maybe what he said wasn't entirely appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's interesting to hear that from Doris, and I think that's an accurate perception. Of course, I didn't have the opportunity to make that comparison, but I think Doris has an accurate perception of that, and I probably just growing up didn't really perceive that. I did see it a couple of times as an adult, where our mother would say to him something like, "No, maybe don't say that."
Yes. But that's a different in personalities and people, how they interact with their spouse or whatever.
I was going to say that Laura's and my mom. So here's a story. Our dad subscribed to a lot of scientific journals, and he would read them, and then they'd be in a stack on his desk. And when he would be out, Laura's and my mother would take the ones from the bottom of the pile and throw them out. And he never noticed.
Or he never
But
said
I
anything
think
anyway.
he never said anything. He might have thought, oh, I must have gotten rid of those. I don't know what. But I think possibly our mother had some ways of very quietly and silently, getting around him. Yeah, I remember some incidents with the chainsaw.
Remember the chainsaw?
Yeah. He cut some things, and Aunt Mary was not happy with them. I think there was one grouping of 5 trees, and he cut down one of them, and she said, no, 4 is not a good artistic number. So she made him cut down another one, so then there were 3. Yes.
Kind of rewinding just a little bit back to something you just mentioned, Laura. So I've accumulated and you've fed me all these, notes and stories in writing about your family and Larry. But my understanding now, after reading all that, which people watching this won't necessarily have yet, that he seemed like a frugal person. He would go to the local diner for lunch, for example. You mentioned about how he saw himself. I mean, externally, even now, after his passing, I think people would have this perception like this really successful entrepreneur and businessman, and there's usually a certain perception that comes with that type of company director. Do you think that outward perception would match Larry's view of himself in any way? Or how do you think he saw himself, kind of unpacking that a little bit further?
Yes, he was frugal, and that was partly because of his life experience based on the timing of when he was born. Being born in 1916, he was born in 1916, so that makes him 13 in 1929 with the stock market crash, and then living through the Depression as a teenager and young adult. And so that experience for everyone who was in that age range at that time stayed with them for the rest of their lives. And the comment that our mother made about him regarding the the extra canned food that we had in the cupboard in the kitchen, she said for him, starvation is always just around the corner. Once you've lived with that, it never goes away. So yes, he was frugal and wore some of his white dress shirts until they were almost threadbare, and it was like you could see through them at the elbows. So he, I don't think, ever saw himself in what we now think of as the successful business owner, executive type of person. He was always just thinking about the next idea and the next invention and what did he want to tackle next and what did he want to get done next. And from what I've heard is that the people who knew him during the most active years of his professional life, even if they didn't agree with him, they recognized his brilliance. They recognized his intellect and his inventiveness. But that was what he was pursuing rather than any kind of an outward presentation of status in any way.
That's very well said. Thank you. Do you have anything to add to that, Luis or Doris?
I agree with Laura that he didn't. What he cared about was pursuing ideas and adding to safety in mountaineering and in inventing, solving problems. I think whether or not, he drove a nice car, or had fancy clothes, or went out to eat at fancy places, just simply wasn't of interest to him. And I think that might have been true of him whether he grew up in the Depression or not, but I'm sure it was more so since he did grow up in the Depression. So here's a story. He told me a story about when he was in college at what was then the College of Puget Sound, is now the University of Puget Sound, which I went to also. His undergraduate advisor said, "Larry, you're doing too many experiments. You're trying too many things. You need to, do fewer of them." And our dad said to him, "But I don't know which ones will work." And that was like him a lot. I think the other stories that we've told you here would tell you that as well.
I think at his core, he does strike me as a scientist and an engineer, above all other things that I can at least see.
Yeah, and an inventor and an engineer.
Inventor, that's the big word, I think.
Primarily.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not so much a business person per se. But go ahead. Sorry, Doris.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I probably lived in the most, in terms of number of houses, I lived in 5 or 6 or 7 with him. And when I think about what the houses were, they were all modest, or houses or apartments or whatever they were all modest. And they didn't have a bunch of decorations. They could be small. It was a big deal when we finally got a 3-bedroom house. And that cars were not important to him. Do you, Louise and Laura, do you remember he had a station wagon that he had forever and ever? And it came to a point where it needed either a new engine or it needed to be replaced totally, and he chose the new engine rather than buy a whole new car. That's the kind of thinking, something part of the Depression maybe, but something part of, I don't need to spend money on new things like that. I can go on with it if we do this one change. Laura, I guess, said his white shirts, or maybe Louise did. His white shirts, which he wore all the time. The only fancy clothes I felt he wore were the Hawaiian shirts that he would. Do you remember the Hawaiian shirts? Yeah, and he had a few of those, and he would wear those, and those were as fancy as he got.
He did have a couple nice suits.
Yes, the suits for business. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm aware, again, based on the documentation I've read. He had a very specific personality. I think perhaps, Louise, what 3 adjectives would you use to describe Larry? And who do you feel among the 3 of you is closest to his personality?
Oh, no.
Oh boy. Describe his personality. Intelligent, opinionated, and abrasive. Maybe abrasive is a little harsh, but plain spoken, we could say that.
That's good. Yeah.
Plain spoken. As to which is most like him, I don't know, but I remember once saying in the last year of my mom's life, Laura's and my mom's life, about something or other. I looked at it and said, that could be better. And my mom immediately said, that sounds just like your father. So that's certainly a trait that I got from him. But yeah, that's what I think people would say about him. Okay, somebody else.
You said opinionated, and I think the word I would have used would have been strong opinions, but not opinionated in a negative sense. That he was,
okay,
he
yeah,
down, you know, but yes, strong opinions.
Yes,
yeah, and I think the other thing is this trial and error until you can solve something, you know, and that whole thing of all the experiments and doing this and then trying that and working through. People would think he was abrasive, but I don't know that he was abrasive and that he didn't give up easily.
Yeah, he wasn't like out to get people or be nasty to people. Right. He would get frustrated if they couldn't understand what he was proposing.
Which he felt was the right thing, usually. Often.
I think one way of describing what Doris and Louise are talking about is how determined he was. Because if he had an idea and he felt he'd thought something through and had arrived at the best solution or the best route to pursue, then he was very persistent about that and determined. So they're both right in saying that he wasn't abrasive, because he was a fairly soft-spoken person and he was very intelligent, but he was extremely persistent. He didn't give up easily. And so he would just continue to try to explain what it was he was saying. So his employees described him once as a tad self-centered, but it wasn't, for him, it wasn't about him. It wasn't, hey, look at me, I'm so great. It was, listen to my idea and let me explain to you why I think this is the right thing to do.
So it wasn't about ego, it was just more idea sharing and ideating.
Yeah, that was my sense, is that it was not about ego. It was about, this is what I've come up with, this is what I think we should do.
Josh, you asked a question, I think, somewhere about why did he go into do the politics things? And I think it really was the same thing. He wanted to get certain ideas across. He didn't really think he was going to win an election for U.S. Senator or anything else, but it was a platform for getting his ideas out. The thing about multi-use of national forests and national lands, or what was the other one? Forgotten. Anyway, he wanted to get nuclear, how to deal with nuclear power and stuff like that.
For more great history on Larry Penberthy and MSR, and further interview perspective from Doris, Laura, and Louisa, be sure to check out the next videos in this special series. Thanks for watching.